today, which is good. So, good afternoon and welcome to our August First Friday event, which is in the height of the summer holidays, and it's not very sunny at the moment outside here, certainly. And we're delighted to have with us our guest is Jen Chapman, who's going to share with us her information, knowledge, experience about improving mental health across the franchise sector, but also key findings from the recent Cinder survey, which was carried out in conjunction with the British Franchise Association. So I shall pass over to you, Jen, now to take the floor and lead and join us and spend time with us for the next 40 minutes or so to share that with us.
Lovely, thank you. Welcome. Hello. I am going to be talking about the survey results today. So in February, I launched the first ever National Franchise Wellbeing Survey. So that was looking at the landscape of mental health and wellbeing across franchising, really. And it was the first survey of its kind to really understand and get some hard data around what it looks like. So, what is the state of mental health and well-being? What do people want? Where are there perhaps any barriers? And we got that data together, but it was published within National Franchise Week with the BFA last month. Oh, no, it's not. It was June. So it was last month. We're in August now, aren't we? So I'm just taking you through that really. I'm not going to go through all of the graphs, all of the data, because that's not going to be fun for anyone on a Friday afternoon. So instead, we'll do a bit of a recap and perhaps hopefully have a little bit of a chat about it, see what you think, see what questions you have. So I'll just go through a roundup of it really. So I'm just going to share my slides with you. If anybody wants to go and view the sort of core data, it is on my website. I've got the link at the end, but you can find it there under the survey link, and you can download the report there too, but feel free to ask any questions along the way. So as I said, that was a survey that we launched at the start of the year. This is a bit of breakdown of who took part. So we had mostly franchisees, but also franchisors and suppliers. Most respondents were women, which I think wasn't a huge surprise from me, but considering franchising is still male dominated, it would be great next time to see more men as well doing that, to get some more insights into male mental health, because we know that actually that is a huge challenge, particularly for men under 45. So we had a real mix of founder franchisors, those in head office operations, sales team, and across lots of different sectors as well, from care to children's activities to tech. So we had a really nice broad mix. So it's given us a good insight into the picture of franchising. We had just under 300 respondents. So when I speak to people, they are saying that's not bad at all. Me being me, I would like more. But I think I have to understand that actually this is the first one. And for a lot of people, the topic of mental health in franchising and in business in general is something that people are still getting their head around and still sort of accepting. So actually it's understandable that we want those numbers to grow. So I am going to be doing the survey again. So hopefully we will get more numbers as well next year. So let's have a little look then. Is it going through? There we go. Okay. So we had generally a universal recognition of the fact that actually people know how much mental health can impact business. So when we talk about mental health, a lot of people talk about happiness and being happy at work. To me, that's not the objective. Being happy all the time is weird. To be quite honest, that's not the goal. That's not something that we can strive for all the time. But really, here it's about taking the understanding of how mental health and well-being can actually impact business performance. So we saw that 97% of franchisors and 100% of franchisees believe that mental health challenges directly impact business performance, which is massive. That's obviously 100%, but that's phenomenal awareness into what mental health can do towards business performance. And then, so that really would include things like mindset, um, growth mindset, ability to actually go out there and do that business performance as well, time time off and away from work, and actually what a franchisee is capable of during business, and same with the franchisor. So we know that actually from the survey, it's really widespread in terms of the experience of mental health challenges. So over 65% of the respondents regularly experience stress, overwhelm, or low mood. And 90%, over 90%, reported experiencing a challenge with their mental health at some point during their time within franchising. It's not all doom and gloom though, so I will get onto that. This isn't to say that franchising is bad for mental health, quite the opposite. But one of the most common things that also came out from the survey was actually loneliness and isolation being a really big factor in terms of a mental health challenge, which I think is surprising because particularly in franchise recruitment, we often talk about, or brands will often talk about the fact that you're part of something bigger, you're part of a network, you're with other people. But actually, this survey showed that loneliness and isolation is still very much present, even when you are part of something more and part of a network. We found then that there is an industry gap because only 1 in 5 people believe that we are doing enough for mental health in franchising. So there is a huge opportunity there to do more. So the reality is that 44% of franchisors cite other priorities as a barrier to doing anything, taking any action around well-being. So the main barriers were other business priorities and also, unsurprisingly, money. So that was a frequent feature. Only 20 or less than 20%, it was about 17%, have a formal wellbeing policy in place. And really, that is the easiest way to start. So at Cinder, we have wellbeing templates that franchise brands can use to do that. But what that really does is take away any grey area. So it sets out in black and white exactly what support is available to franchisees and to head office teams, when and where a franchisor will step in and support and what that looks like, and also setting out why it is so important to the franchisee or franchisor. So a wellbeing policy is a really important place to start, and an easy win, I would say. So to answer your question, Simon, so Simon's put in a question: loneliness and isolation within the franchise network or with family and friends. So didn't dive in specifically to where the loneliness was. It could be a combination. So anecdotally, I'm thinking the fact that a lot of franchisees, and when they've done training with me and we've had those conversations, it's been around sometimes not family and friends around them not understanding the same kind of pressures that they are under. So if you're not self-employed, you don't always get it. It's different, isn't it? It's different to an employed role. And so actually those pressures and responsibilities and the number of hats that people wear is something that if you're not in it, yes, you can of course understand it, but you don't share that same kind of feeling of pressure. But also there is a fair amount of loneliness and isolation within a franchise network. So we know that even though people are part of something, actually, I have worked with a lot of franchise brands before where even though they are part of a network of maybe 50 or more people, if they haven't got those opportunities to connect with each other, having other franchisees in the network doesn't necessarily automatically mean people aren't lonely. Um, so it's a bit of both, I would say. And then currently, only 13% of franchise brands offer external wellbeing training programs. So what we can see there is a massive disconnect in the fact that franchisors and franchisees alike absolutely recognise the presence of mental health challenges in their personal and professional life, absolutely recognise the importance of it and how it can impact business performance. Also, don't believe we're doing enough. But there's that massive gap because although that is true, there's also fairly little proactive action being done about it. And that's what we want to change. Okay, so lived experience then of mental health challenges in franchising. So we have our stat here of 3 in 4 franchise professionals have experienced a wellbeing challenge directly related to their franchise involvement. So since becoming a franchisee or since working in franchising as a supplier or as a franchisor, these are the key factors that people have experienced. So stress was incredibly common. So over 80%, I believe, of franchisees experience stress on a monthly basis, low mood, overwhelm, burnout, and then, as we talked about, loneliness. So 40% feel lonely every month, or even more frequently than that. So that was quite a surprise to me. I knew that would be a feature, having done a lot of work with franchisees and franchisors, but I didn't realise that the extent would be that much. That it would be every month feeling real loneliness. So, what does the business performance impact look like then? So, I will often hear franchisors say, "Oh, yeah, that'll be nice to do." Um, and I get it. It's often seen as like a nice, soft, fluffy thing. But what I am trying to do is turn that dial so that actually we can recognize the impact on business performance and that commercial aspect of looking after mental health and well-being, as well as it being a good moral thing to do. And none of this, by the way, is intended to be critical to any franchisor teams at all. I've been within head office teams within a franchise, and it's hard. You're stretched in so many different ways, and you only have a limited budget. But for me, what I am seeing, kind of from all of my different experiences within different areas of franchising, is that actually focusing on the individuals and improving their awareness, their emotional intelligence, the tools that they have to recognize struggles and manage them, actually is a longer term solution. So, yes, sales and marketing training is brilliant. That can be a, a sort of quicker fix, I guess, to see some more instant results. But actually, if you kind of flip that the order, the priority of them, then a franchisee is more likely to think creatively, have more of a growth mindset, build better relationships if their mental fitness is stronger. So yes, still do the sales and marketing training, but once someone has those skills and those tools, because they're going to be better able to use it and make use of that. So, the kind of impacts that we can generally see from poor mental health as a business owner, whether that's franchisee or franchisor, is reduced productivity. So, around 60% of the time that someone is staying off work because of back pain, that is actually the true cause of that is poor mental health. And we know that actually sickness rates are creeping up, they are increasing. And very commonly, that is actually down to anxiety and stress. So, reduced productivity. So, it may well be that someone is at work, but they're not really performing to their usual level or being as productive as they can be. That's known as presenteeism. Poor decision making. So, that may well be sort of poor judgment when making decisions. It may well be acting on emotion rather than the kind of longer term or logical step. Increased mistakes. So whether that's not following franchise model, whether that's making mistakes with customers, whatever it is, they can be costly to either brand reputation and actual costs. So if we're talking things like creating marketing materials, things like that. The next one will be social withdrawal, and that's where it can be a bit of a negative cycle in terms of loneliness and social withdrawal feeding into each other, really. So it could well be that someone is feeling anxious, they're feeling stressed, and they start to withdraw. They then don't join the things that a franchisor has put on, whether that's team events, team calls, team chats, whatever it is. They're not attending those, and then that just adds to that feeling of isolation, which increases their level of anxiety and stress, which makes them withdraw more. So actually, it can get into a bit of a negative spiral if it's not recognized and stopped. There's also increased friction. So this is something I've seen across probably every franchise brand that I have worked with, there may well be one person within the network that, for whatever reason, becomes unhappy. That may well be a conflict they have with head office. It may well be something within themselves. And actually, they have increasing pushback and challenge and conflict with head office. And it's very easy to then bring other people in. And I think probably all of us here have seen that kind of uh, toxicity within a network where it can breed very quickly, especially if there are sort of private WhatsApp groups or things like that. Um, and early exits ultimately. So that is where a franchisee will physically step away from their agreement. And that's potentially exiting midway. And then the franchisor and franchisee have this sometimes quite challenging battle to get out of the ongoing contract. Or it's when they get to the end of their term, they just step away and actually they're not renewing. And you're then losing as a franchisor a good franchisee, a business that is this kind of up and running. Um, Sometimes as well, in terms of the early exits, it's actually the highest performing franchisees that sometimes just step away. So that's something that I've increasingly seen probably over the last year is franchisors saying they had absolutely no idea that it was their highest performing franchisee, the one that people don't ever worry about, and you would perhaps get someone to speak to, that actually ends up stepping away because they just can't do it. And that's generally known as high functioning or high performing anxiety. It's someone who performs really well, they don't drop the ball, they attend things, and they're kind of those swans, if you're looking at them outwardly, look graceful, look like they're handling everything, but actually underneath the surface, it's really bubbling away. And it may well be that that anxiety, that burnout level just keeps creeping up until the point that they just can't do it. And so they will just step away. Now, I know this all sounds incredibly negative. It's not. I think the really positive thing is that actually both sides, franchisees, franchisors, recognize the importance and want change. And actually, to get to that point of change and making, we call it making it more of a psychologically safe culture, there's not masses of things that need to change. It's not like a quick fix to change a culture or to improve a culture. It is an ongoing thing. Both parties, franchisors, franchisees, suppliers, everybody need to see that consistent gradual change. But essentially, it's not unachievable. So, from the survey, what franchisees wanted most was one-to-one support, either from internal teams within head office or external professionals. They wanted skills training to best understand and cope with the challenges they have as a franchisee. They also wanted improved connection, so whether that's with head office or other franchisees in the network, so that they do reduce isolation, and regular meaningful check-ins. And the main point there was that it is meaningful. It's not just, oh, how are you? And then no kind of meaningful follow up. It's actually, before we start talking about your business numbers and your business performance, I want to check that you're okay. Because as part of that recruitment process, generally speaking, it's so much about the franchisees, isn't it? I know when I've worked as a head office, it's so much about them as a person. So not necessarily their experience, but it's about them, their personality, their attitude, their beliefs, how they kind of represent themselves. And really, what it is making sure that that's carried on, that emphasis and that focus on them as a person is carried on throughout their experience as a franchisee, even years in. What franchisors want is practical tools that actually work in a franchise environment. So, all of us working here in franchising know how weird and wonderful it is. So, again, it's one of those things that unless you're in it, you don't necessarily know how it ticks. And actually, it's a different setup. So an off-the-shelf kind of employee tool that doesn't necessarily work for a franchise network. So it's tools that actually work. They want training and support that makes them feel empowered and confident to have those conversations. So if they are recognizing signs in their franchisees, actually they not only know what to say, but they feel confident to do it as well. They feel confident that they're not going to be making things worse. That's a myth that comes around quite often. But also that they're going to be doing something that's effective. They're not overstepping the mark, but also they're doing enough. And then the final one was actually a manageable solution that doesn't give them another job to do, um, which I fully appreciate because actually, for a lot of franchisors, the thought is then, well, where does the support stop? Do we start supporting X, Y, and Z? What do we do? Especially if mental health and wellbeing hasn't been a feature of your brand and your support before, that's where the importance of a wellbeing policy can really come into play because actually it sets out what you're going to do and why and how and when in black and white. So it's getting rid of that grey area. So sticking with that kind of that bit of positivity that actually there is something we can do about it. It's absolutely not all doom and gloom, and I think that's really important to state as well. So actually, 73% of franchisees and 89% of franchisors say that that franchising has helped their well-being, which I think for us as an industry is such a massive flag that we can wave that yes, they've experienced challenges. They've experienced mental health challenges since being in franchising, but actually, overall, they still believe that going into the industry has helped their well-being. So I think for us as an industry, that's a massive flag to fly to promote franchising to other people that aren't yet in it. So most people have also stated that they would feel comfortable talking to their franchisor about well-being, which is brilliant because actually having that first conversation is one of the most important things. So the survey found that most people feel comfortable talking. So what we need to then do is make sure that those pathways for having the chat are there. You know, that it's all well and good having that open door policy, but it's actually making sure that there's opportunities for that door to be open and for people to feel like they can have a chat and get that support. And actually, for a franchisor and the franchisor support teams, that they feel comfortable and confident to be able to handle that conversation when a franchisee does come to speak with them. And then ultimately, as I said before, it's all about actually being ready for the change. So, yes, we've recognized that it's an issue. We've recognized we should and want to do more about it. And so now it's about how we do that. So, what now? So, the data really gives us three foundations. It gives us that permission to act. So, it gives us that clear, hard data, that opportunity to talk openly about it without stigma or to certainly start reducing it. It gives us direction for support because we understand what franchisees and what franchisors want and where those barriers are, which ultimately gives us this starting point. So we have this baseline for measuring progress now as an industry, and we can really start to do something about it. And as I've gone through fairly briefly, there are some really key small things that we can do that could actually have a real impact. So I think it's really important that it's not about doing everything right and doing everything at once and making these big grand gestures. Actually, it's about doing something, doing it well, and doing it consistently. So I really believe that actually when we can help people to thrive, then a business will naturally as well. So as an industry, it's always, I believe, been very people first. And so now it's about showing up to do that. So I'm going to get rid of these slides so that we can just have a bit of a chat. Um, does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Yes, hello.
So, Jen, I think the area that I'm obviously interested in lots of, I think everything that you've said is the results of the survey are, really massively interesting generally. I think particularly the area I'm interested in is recruitment. And
Mm,
you mentioned obviously about, to some degree, the survey has almost given permission, for want of a better word, for people to start talking more openly about mental health, within franchising. And therefore, in
yeah.
terms of recruitment, if you like, what should what should franchisors do as part of their recruitment process to establish and understand the mental health situation of the person that they're talking to and
Yeah.
provide support? What does good look like from a recruitment point of view? And is there any issues in terms of any legislation or big do's and don'ts around that?
So it's a big question. Where do I start? So I think initially, So one of the things that I'm doing as Cinder to respond to that, and this is the first time I've talked about it. This I seem to do this with you. I talked about the survey for the first time in front of anybody. I don't know what you do. Bring it out in me. So one of the things that I am going to be doing over the next few months, is still a fair amount of work to do, is I'm actually building an accreditation specifically for franchise wellbeing for franchisors. It's not just going to be a badge that people can buy. There is a certain level of criteria they need to meet, but that in itself will act as a positive recruitment tool for franchisees. You know, if you've got two networks side by side that are offering fairly similar things, actually, particularly with a younger generation coming into franchising, people are looking for that well-rounded support where it's not just about purely about business and numbers. It's actually about, okay, well, if I'm finding that hard, what happens? So I think there's a few things that you can do as a franchisor. One, you can give your potential franchisee the opportunity to tell you if they've experienced any challenges before. They don't have to. So you can't make it compulsory that they tell you, you know, any kind of past or current diagnosis, but giving them the opportunity to do that, particularly framing it as an opportunity to best support them. Um, you know, how can we best support you? There's also something that you can create if they say yes. There is something you can then create called a RAP, which is a wellness recovery action plan. And that is a working document that both you and they put together, that again sets out kind of warning flags, you know, that something might not be right, because just like physical health and mental health condition can fluctuate too. So what a RAP does is allow both parties to kind of know when to act, and what that action looks like. So it kind of gives that permission from day one, which is brilliant. So if you can bring it into that initial recruitment process, all the better. For me, it's also about recognizing the roller coaster that a franchisee is going to go on, because I would say pretty much every franchisee, regardless of their past experience and who they are, will go through that up and down emotion. You know, from the moment that they sign their agreement to when they're actually, you know, working as a franchisee, they will go on these up and down things. So there'll be that initial bit of, like, you know, feeling like you can take on the world because you've signed it and you can see all of these possibilities. Then perhaps you do your training and you actually start. And for a lot of people, they'll really dip at that point because they think, right, I've actually got to do it now on my own. And for that first month or two, they perhaps don't have an income that they've always had before. So actually, they can take a real dip. They'll then get paid for the first time. So it goes right back up. And then they're up here, and then they have to pay their franchise fee for the first time. So it goes back down again. And there's this initial point of conflict of, well, why am I paying you? I could just do this myself. And then ultimately the franchisor will do something that reminds them as to why they're part of that and why they're paying their franchise fee. And from that point, it will start to kind of stabilize, generally speaking. So actually, if you can educate your franchisees from day one on the fact that they're going to go through that process, so when they're in those dips and those highs, they know, and they know that it's all part of the process, and giving them the training and tools from day one to recognize that and get themselves out of those points. So when they are experiencing anxiety from uncertainty and the kind of grit that you need as a business owner, they will have those tools from the start.
Okay, great. And it's interesting that everything you've said is directly related to business performance in terms of
Yeah,
sales, income, etc. So the two are very much,
absolutely. Yeah, like I think that's where I go back to this thing of it's not just a soft and fluffy thing. Like, yes, I think it's good to look after people and see how they are, but it's not just about being kind. You
yeah,
know, everybody, franchisee and franchisor, has gone into this to create a successful business.
yeah.
And actually, this goes hand in hand as part of that. It's a very commercial thing too.
Okay, great. Simon, over to you. So you got your hand up. I got in
Yeah,
first, I have to say.
I just find it interesting. I guess my immediate reaction is disappointing that we're not doing better in the industry, and there's certainly it's not a good advert for franchising. If you were to look at take those statistics at face value, the biggest concern. I mean, and for me, it all comes down to. I'll be interested to know if the survey identify what actions led to their mental health. Was it specific actions by the franchisor? Was it
Hmm.
specific actions by people outside them? Because I'll tell you this: as a previous franchisee, I did struggle with that, and the factor that made me struggle was the fact that I borrowed too much money to get into the franchise in the first
Right.
place.
Yeah.
It was over
Yeah. Yeah.
gearing,
Yeah.
so your margin for error was reducing and reducing and reducing, and when there was a
Yeah.
change in interest rates, that suddenly impacted your mental health.
So
You know,
much pressure, isn't it?
yeah. So what I'm trying to say there is, as an industry, therefore, do we need to go back to basics a little bit and think more carefully and do things properly about when we're recruiting people? So don't, encourage them to come into franchising where they can borrow 95% of what they need to get into it, which we see a hell of a lot of now in the
Mm.
industry. Do we need to think more positively about, well, look, instead of cutting back on field-based franchise support, what I like to call boots on the ground, and relying too much on virtual and remote support. Let's go back to the good old days where every franchisee had a visit and had an assigned regional support manager. Because I think what
Mm.
your survey is saying is that we've kind of deviated a bit from what franchising was all about. Um, in the good old days was very much about recruiting the right people, making sure that they could afford to do it and didn't have those pressures from the very start. And secondly, making sure that they had genuine field-based support that they could relate to. I'm staggered that
Mm.
any franchisee will feel lonely and isolated within a franchise network. I never had that because I knew I could always go and see my neighbour, or I could go to a regional meeting. We could all get together and everything else. So
Mm.
it's a bit alarming. I would rather deal with the front end causes of it and making sure that franchisors or people in franchising act a little bit more responsibly to eliminate those pressures rather than put a band-aid on it once we've seen the impact. Um,
Yeah. I
so
think
address the
that's
issues and
key,
address
isn't
the
it?
cause. Make sure people
Yeah.
come into franchising with the right mindset.
Yeah.
Um, because if you're not, it's not a partnership. No, franchising isn't a partnership. And I think that's something that stresses people out. Again, when I do my mediation work, a lot of franchisees come into mediation thinking, well, this is a business partnership. Why are they doing this? And why they, do you see what I mean? So for me, it's more about a mindset thing and making sure as an industry, we go back to basics and do things properly and
Mm.
then make sure that we are there as an industry to support people when they do have mental health issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important to be proactive about it, isn't it? And not wait until there's a fire to put out, but actually make sure people are going into it eyes wide open. I think you're right in the fact that actually, to me, within ethical franchising, a good business plan would be people knowing actually if they didn't earn a certain amount for however long that they can afford that and they're not putting themselves under undue pressure because finances and worries about money is the most common cause of stress and burnout because obviously it has so many repercussions not just on the individual but on their family and their day-to-day life. But I think what's really important is to take from this that yes, mental health challenges are a significant feature for franchisees and franchisors, but that's not just in franchising. That absolutely features outside of franchising as standalone business owners too. More so, actually, the isolation is higher. I can't remember the stat off my head because I've been looking at all of them today, but that it features even higher than it does in franchising. And so, actually, to keep hold of that stat at the end that I shared, that actually I think it was like over 70%, wasn't it, of franchisees and franchisors said that actually going into the industry has helped their mental health and well-being. So yes, it's still a feature, but it's going to be because the stat is that 1 in 4 of us as adults will experience a mental health challenge regardless. So it's going to feature within the franchise industry. But I think you're right, it's what we then do about it and how we respond.
Yeah, because you also have to remember that, and again, for me, starting a franchise was something I did to positively benefit my mental health. I mean, I was in an employed
Yeah,
situation and it was driving me nuts and it was
yeah,
having a real massive impact. So for
mm,
me, franchising was my opportunity to give myself a little bit more peace of mind.
yeah,
And so it's a bit concerning that once because most people do that. They make those life-changing decisions for their mental health and come
Hmm.
into franchising for all those right reasons.
Mm.
And it's a shame that the franchising, once they're in the franchise, we're not contributing positively enough to their mental health.
But
Um,
do you think, Jen, do you think that the figures could be skewed by the relatively small sample size in terms of the number of people who responded? I'm not saying that everyone who didn't respond is all happy, but I think in terms of the points that Simon's making about the
Yeah.
stats that were thrown up, it could be, if you like, the majority of people responded obviously because they've got a particular
yeah,
reason
It
to do
could be,
so.
yeah, it could be that actually if they've had their own personal experience, whether that's directly themselves or someone closer to them, they perhaps feel more passionately about it and are going to spend the time
yeah. But
to
you're right. I mean,
respond.
these are things that are not exclusive to franchising. In my work,
Yeah.
when I have people come to me and I say, well, why are you looking to leave this particular role? It's because of their mental health. And then when I
Mm.
speak to franchisors that say, look, what do we need to do to retain our staff, to keep them? A lot of the time it's about keeping your promises. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
6 months, the individual was expecting a review of their
Yeah.
performance. You make sure that
Mm.
you do it after 6 months and keep your promises. And that way you keep people
Yeah.
engaged and their positive mental attitude. I don't know whether we
Yeah.
can still use that phrase or not, but so yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, I think that is key. Like keeping your promise is maintaining trust. And that's what it takes to help create this culture of psychological safety where people do feel comfortable to have those conversations. So those things that we consider to be really small, doing the 6 month review when you said you would do it, they matter. Those small
100%.
things matter. And I think, as you said, a lot of people go into franchising because they want a better work-life balance, because they want, they recognize that actually they have one life, so live it how they actually want to. And that is why it's so crucial to build those personal insights and that self-awareness lit from day one, so that you can build in those habits as a business priority. Because from just today's call, we've seen how much commercial sense it actually
Oh God, I mean,
has to
it's
run a business. So you have to have those,
yeah.
you can build those personal habits, the mental health habits in, you know, allocate half an hour of your business admin a week to taking care of your mental health and well-being. That's not being selfish, it's not being indulgent. Actually, that's making sure that you're in a really good position to be a business owner.
Mm.
And
No,
Jen, have you ever done anything similar with a network or across networks? As in, you've had replies and responses from the whole of a network. Again, because obviously picking up on Simon's point, I'm pointing that way on my screen, Simon, in terms of
mhm.
if you like the industry's not doing very well. I suppose
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that's actually reflective of the industry. So if you've got something that's across a full
Mm.
network, how those figures potentially cross compare.
Yeah, so I would say actually from the stats, I don't think we're doing badly as a network. I genuinely don't. I think the fact that not as a network, as an industry, I think the fact that most people feel comfortable to talk to their franchisor is the stat that we had there is probably higher than you would get in an employed setting. So I don't think we're doing badly. I just think there's a lot that we can do to make it better,
Yeah.
that would make the industry more secure and successful. And I've gone off on a tangent and forgotten your question. I'm so
Well,
sorry.
I
What was
suppose my
it?
question is, have any franchisors been brave enough to actually
Oh, to do the
to do it
individual
in their
one.
network to get everyone to reply, across the whole of their network?
Yeah. So there's something that I have just finished creating with Gather. Neil, who's often
Yeah.
in here. So where I've put together a um, well-being index score. So it's basically a benchmark. So it's a quarterly interaction with a network that creates a numerical score for the network's well-being. That would be done on a quarterly basis, so that actually a franchisor can see over the space of a year, how are we doing? How did the network respond to this change? Or are there particular times of the year that are really challenging? And actually that's when you need to step up your support. So by doing that index, you can start to see trends and insights as a network. I've not launched that yet. This is why I was saying before that my August isn't quiet this year because I'm doing all of this stuff. But that is going to come out as of autumn, so that actually people will be able, franchisors will be able to get that data. So when they did this, how did the network respond? Whether that was like a system change or whether it's, bringing in some support, what did that do? And what times of the year actually do they need to act in a different way? So not yet is the
No,
short
no, that's
answer,
really
but coming.
interesting. Yeah, really interesting, Jen. And then again, be really hopefully informative in terms of how the industry is actually performing or how particular networks are.
Mm, yeah, absolutely.
Great. Chris, Ed, Ken's got your hand up.
Julie, yeah, it was just to say when we complete projects, we always include a 3-month review in month 4 so that you can look at the actual performance against the forecast and the business plan. And it would just make sense. Funnily enough, we are discussing things with Neil as well, and we've been looking at potentially aspects of the business that might be classed as a soft KPI. And I think this would certainly fall into that category. And whereas at the moment, it's generally financial, market research, customer surveys, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But when you're looking to plan um, the next 3 months based on the actual activity and the actual performance of the first 3, it would make sense to have something in that review about well-being. But
Yeah,
I also
absolutely.
wondered, also just before that last thing, in terms, we also, Mash and I talked about including it um, in the induction training side, but
Mhm.
you you've got to have the right approach, haven't you? Because that must be just as important to get the benefits that well-being, having a strong well-being um, within a network. If you're going to benefit or take up those benefits, then the franchisor's got to have the right approach.
You get involved with induction training, don't you, Jen?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the kind of probably one of the main things I do now is franchisee induction training. So it's part of their onboarding process. So the idea is that the franchisee does it, they can access it from the moment their contract is signed, and they understand how important it is. So when we're talking about that commercial aspect of mental health and well-being, they understand from day one that actually it's essential to look after their mental fitness, and then here's how you do it, so here's how you see the signs, here's the tools you can have, because also it's not a one size fits all approach. So I think, as you're saying, it is really important how the franchisor approaches it, because it's not about doing an e-learning or writing a piece in an operations manual, because actually how one person interprets it and is going to need it is going to be very different. So we'll talk about things like stress signatures, which is how does stress show up in you. That would be different for all of us, for every single one of us. And so how the individual responds to that is going to be different. What triggers their level of stress and anxiety is going to be different. So what's really important is not that the franchisor gets another job to do, but actually they're empowering their franchisees as much as they would with, sales and marketing training. They're empowering them with the skills and knowledge to take ownership of it themselves.
Yeah. And presumably on that basis, even though you mentioned manuals, a well-being policy or a well-being statement or a well-being information in the manual is almost, not equally as beneficial, but beneficial to again enable people to understand that it is part of the model and the system and the support
Yeah,
they need it.
absolutely. Yeah, it should be there because it should be part of the model and part of how the franchise works, how it runs. And actually, the more areas that it can feature, the better, because again, that goes towards that piece of consistency, and a franchisee seeing that actually, oh, it keeps coming up. They do mean it. They've not just put it in one bit. Actually, it's a recurring thing. And a wellbeing policy should be a live document that is reviewed at least annually, to be updated as well. So it's also got to be written in I was going to say non-legal speak. Sorry, we have got law in here, haven't we? I'm very sorry. But, so that people can understand it. It's one of those things that actually, if you're feeling anxious, you don't want to have to try and decipher what it actually means. It should be really easy to find and really easy to understand.
Yeah. Can I
Yeah.
just on that point there, because again, I'm not saying no new to this, but what we're talking about here is what we're almost saying is it's an obligation on the part of the franchisor to ensure the mental well-being of their franchisees. Yeah.
Hmm.
Therefore, does that need to be represented in the franchise agreement? Does that have to be a boilerplate clause within the franchise agreement going forward? Is that what we're saying?
Well, I mean, there's franchisees aren't employees, are they? So
Well, this
there's
is the
not
thing.
there's
I mean,
not that element of
how far do you cross that line? Look,
yeah.
again, I'm just thinking of, again, from a litigation point of view and everything. They're
Mm,
not employees, but the
yeah,
closer you bring them to become an employee, is the franchisor exposing themselves to litigation, to problems down the line,
yeah.
etc. So I'm playing devil's advocate here, which is what I love to do, as you know.
Yeah, but
You know,
it's something that needs to be thought about, doesn't it? If people are going
yeah,
to start changing franchise agreements and things like that, then yeah, it does. And so a franchisee isn't an employee. But I think even from your view, in terms of getting people into a head office for those employees, there are legal obligations in terms of retaining talent and knowledge within a head office as an employee, then yeah,
yeah.
that from a legal stance, that is
Yeah.
essential.
Yeah, I mean, for me,
Um,
it needs to come under the banner of validation, from a franchising point of view. If you've got happy, successful franchisees, your validation is going to be right up there and you will
yeah,
recruit more franchisees. So it has to
yeah,
be, I guess, allocated a position, a file, in terms of franchising. Otherwise, we're just appearing to tick all the right boxes just for the sake of it, rather than actually think of it from a business point of view and say, right, okay, if we take seriously the mental health of our franchisees, then that
yeah,
means that our validation to anybody outside of the network is gonna help us tremendously. But like I said,
mm,
the only thing I struggle with is the franchisor's responsibility and how far should they be going as a franchisor?
Mm.
yeah,
Because I fully understand and appreciate it from a franchisee's point of view and how they treat their staff, which is why it has to be part of the induction training and in the
yeah,
operations manual. But how
yeah,
far does the franchisor need to be involved in that direct relationship,
yeah.
personal relationship with their
And
franchisees?
I
That's an
think
area that worries me a little bit.
I think for me, the way to get away from that risk is actually not by taking on all of the support yourself as a franchisor, but that's why it's so essential to give your franchisees the tools and knowledge to do it themselves, to create the wellbeing policy, to provide the training, to create the RAP document. So to have those, because that's not then taking accountability and ownership yourself as a franchisor. It's saying, look, you're an individual, you're a business owner, just as much as you're responsible for the way that your business runs day to day, you're responsible for how you run day to day. And actually, if you're not thriving, you're not going to be in a position for your business to do so either. So to me, it's not about taking on that responsibility. It's not about doing it for them. You can't make a franchisee go outside and exercise or get sleep. You can't do that, but it's about empowering them with the knowledge and the tools as to why that's so important and how they can do it.
Yeah, I suppose it's enabling, and then it's having for want of a
Yeah,
better term, an audit trail in place. So if anything does happen, whether it's recruitment, whether it's the quarterly review, etc., there's, for want of a better word, evidence there to support the fact that the well-being support was provided. Ed, have you seen
yeah.
anything in your recruitment experiences working with various franchisors that anyone does really, really well in relation to recruitment and well-being and trying to bring the right people in and support people in the right ways.
Um, Not in such a structured manner as what Jen's suggesting. Um,
Interesting.
so there's brands that do it pretty well. They look after their franchisees, but is it all formalized and written down? Perhaps not so much. I think there's brands out there that send people Jen's way and stuff. And I think the thing that I thought was most important so far that has been mentioned there that from Jen is, well, it's two things actually. So the first one is I think it could actually be really beneficial in the franchisee recruitment process. So you can actually, so I've always leaned into saying to people, this is actually going to be a really tough challenge for you. The first few months, you're probably going to earn next to nothing. It's going to be a bit of a struggle, but that's why we're telling you now to prep you for this. It's not generally gone down the route of talking about your mental health being impacted and affected as well, and that link between the financial output or financial results connected to it. So I think there's a good piece of education that could go into the franchise recruitment piece at the front end, and in doing that, actually it makes the proposition more attractive because for the franchisee, prospective franchisee, okay, shit, these guys actually care about me. They actually want my mental health to do well. They want my business to do well. They thought about it from every angle. It's another tick against your, if they're comparing two brands, it's another tick on your side. So I think that's important. But the other thing is that the franchisors themselves cannot be the mental health providers. I remember doing your course, Jen, and you saying that the employees or you should not be the person providing that advice, support, and
Yeah,
guidance. You should be
absolutely.
the one who is able to show them the path to find the right support and
Yeah,
guidance.
the
So
signposter.
yeah, the signposter.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I could see someone struggling, it's not my role to help them through that process. I'm not a
Mm.
counselor, therapist, or anything like that. It's
Yeah,
okay, here's what you could do as an option for you,
yeah,
and that's it. So I don't think it comes into the franchise agreement. It's away from that. It's just actually we as a brand understand there are challenges. We know that you will probably face some highs and lows, and if that's going to impact whatever else is going on in your life, these guys, this is probably one of the best ways you can find support. And I think that's
Equally, though, Ed, sorry to interrupt, and I agree with you. Don't you think it's important that franchisors understand what actions they take to adversely affect the mental well-being of their franchisees?
so. I think that it if they have this support and signpost to their franchisees once they're on board, if they're not following their own advice and guidance and support, then for their staff, then that sort of send up red flags, right? Um, so yeah, sorry, could you
Yes,
rephrase your question? Because I think I went off on a tangent there.
no, no, I just wanted to, it's not really a question. It's just a statement that's sort of coming out of this that although we don't want the franchisors to be deliberately or actively delivering the mental health coaching, as a franchisor, particularly new franchisors, because remember, they're transitioning from running their
Mm.
own business to now becoming somebody whose sole reason for being is to ensure their franchisees are successful. And that is a huge mindset shift. So I think for the younger franchisors, they need to understand what actions they take that will potentially impact on the mental health of their franchisees. And that could be things down to, whether you're recruiting the right people, whether you're paying lip service to the support you're providing them, or whether you are doing things that are not conducive to what the franchisee believes or what they bought into. So that was the broader question,
So yeah,
do
more education for every franchisor is probably a really good thing, isn't it?
yeah.
And so I guess for this would be one for Jen is make sure you start at the core first, which is that franchisor. Make sure they understand before it being just handed out to the whole networks, which I'm sure you're probably on
yeah,
top of, Jen, already, right?
yeah, definitely. Like whenever I work with the brand to look at their mental health and well-being, I always say that the training should start with head office first. Because actually, if you're educating your franchisees first, they're naturally going to want to talk about it, and they're perhaps then going to think, right, okay, this is a place where I can talk about it. So if they do, and then the franchisor isn't equipped, that's not fair for either. That's not fair on the franchise support team to have those conversations that they're not equipped to have. But it's also not really fair on the franchisees to say, yeah, come and talk to us, but then we're not ready to talk to you. So I would always say, in terms of mapping it out and timeline, start with the franchise support team first, then roll it out across the network. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly from our point of view, I'd say it has to start at the top because we've seen, on a few occasions, situations where the business is suited, the market's suited, potentially the management team might be suited, but actually the person who owns the business, the CEO, is just a completely wrong personality. And, struggles with the fact that not everyone's prepared to work 22 hours a day because they're prepared to work 22 hours a day, 7 days a week for the first 3 years. And if you can't get your head around that, then, if you don't understand the fundamental difference between, if you like, franchisors and franchisees in all respects, then you shouldn't be doing it because, you're not a dictator. You're not someone who's just going to tell them what they're going to do and expect them to jump as high as you want them to. You are there to be their business partner, but to support them. And if you don't get that, you shouldn't be for a franchisor anyway.
I think also, just going back to Simon's point, I think it's a really good point, because I've seen so many franchisors that, particularly ones that are rapidly growing, where they've started with maybe sort of, they've started working with me when they've had maybe 5 franchisees, and then they've rapidly grown. It's also about implementing support from day one that you can scale, because it's all well and good for a franchisor to be there at the end of the phone or to be on WhatsApp 24/7, but actually that's not sustainable. That's not good for the franchisor's mental health. So actually it's making sure that they implement the kind of mental health and wellbeing support that is still doable when they've perhaps got 30 franchisees or more. Yeah. So it's not something, it's them having the boundaries as well. And again, that's where having a good wellbeing policy is really helpful, because actually it sets out those boundaries, so a franchisor doesn't have to feel guilty because they're not doing X, Y, and Z, because actually that's what it's set out to be from day one.
Right, Chris, any final thoughts?
I know I agree with most of what's been said. Franchisors need to understand mental health impact of their actions on their employees too. Just as franchisors, we need to understand the impact of our decisions on the franchisees. But I think that you raised a point, Julie, about recruitment and almost some kind of pre-screening, because whichever way we look at this, 2 things are true. One is that it's going to be a tough journey. The first few months, the first few years of being in a new business is tough. And I think you have to be fit to go into that journey. And I think there's a risk that we're likely to find candidates who are at a point of change in their life for some reason. And that often could be, there could be a mental health issue around that's actually prompted that change. Somebody who's fundamentally unhappy and is thinking, it may be in their home life, but actually they want change. And they think, well, I'll change my job, I'll become a franchisee. But they're looking for some change. So there may be some sort of fundamental instability there. And then we're asking people to go and face a particularly tough, few years.
Yeah, I think that's where that point
about pre-screening, which I think is probably quite important.
100%.
I think what Ed was saying was really important about that's why it's so essential to talk about how challenging it is going to be, so that someone can go in it eyes wide open and look at that bigger picture, so they know they need to have that grit and they can prepare. But I think in terms of screening, we've got to be really careful in the fact that, I'm sure this isn't what you mean, but we can't be saying no to someone because they've had a mental health challenge. I know that's not what you were saying, but yeah, but I think that's really important, because often people think, oh, if they've said yes, they've experienced anxiety or depression, or they've got whatever condition. Actually, people that have experienced a mental health challenge can often be a lot more insightful and have a lot more tools than people who haven't, because actually they have built more resilience because they've had to get through a certain thing, and they have more insight and awareness about themselves. So I think it's having that screening, but in a really considered way.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to finish by, we've mentioned on a number of occasions today, Neil, Newman and Gather. I'm going to finish by asking everyone to get their phones and scan the barcode to leave feedback on today's session using the Gather system that we use, and many others and some of our clients use as well, which takes about 30 seconds, and it's dead simple and straightforward, because that's how we like things to be. And then while you are completing that, to thank everyone for coming, and hopefully everyone enjoys the rest of the August holidays. And if you're going away somewhere, have a great time. And if you're not going away somewhere, enjoy being in the UK. And hopefully we'll see you in September. The next session on the 4th of September is TBC in terms of actual guest. I'll actually be away as well, so I'm going to be looking to Ken and Mash to run those sessions. So we've got an internal meeting next week to discuss that. But we'll be back as usual in September when the schools will be on the way back just about, and